Hey, so quick question. What do you think is the appropriate time to tell your best friend group that you are having a kid?
I think probably after that first trimester, that's usually industry
Mhm.
standard,
Yeah.
right? You want to get out of the greatest window of risk for a miscarriage. But I would think, you got about 40 weeks. You subtract
hmm
13, that gives you 27. I think 27 weeks, we'll call it 26, and even half of the year. I think that's a reasonable amount of time to tell a friend group that you've had a
And not
baby.
and not just any friend group. I realize it's a lot of people. Like if you're in a friend group with like four others and you want to make sure you tell them all. If only it was like convenient, like a group chat where they're all in the same place and checking daily. That would be a really good time to tell them that you're expecting, not, hey, last week, here's our son. Anyway, this is just a hypothetical. No one's ever done this to us. I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts were.
Yeah. I introduced him to this podcast too, so hopefully you can get some tips like this one,
Yeah, this is a
tell
good
your
one.
friends. Good tip.
Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome back to the Working on the Dad Pod. I am Alex. With me, as always, is Ethan. Today, we are working on pets. Not exactly like doing veterinary work, but we're talking about weighing the pros and cons of getting pets, how we've grown up with pets, have pets now, don't have pets now, how the decision gets in. But before we get into all of that, before we get into story time and working on the dad bod, I want to remind everyone, I want to thank you for being here and remind you to like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok. We're also with Threads. We got a Facebook page this week. All of those are working on the Dad Pod, except for Twitter/X. That's working on Dad Pod because they have a low character limit. But
hmm
anyway,
hmm
other big news, we launched our website this week, workingonthedadpod.com. If you didn't catch all those links, just go to workingonthedadpod.com. You'll find all of them because I made sure to include them so that I wouldn't have to remember them. And maybe in the future, I'll just tell you to go there. Ethan, how you doing?
I'm all right. That was, as always, Alex, a great intro. Thank you for hitting everything up. Um, I'm doing, I'm doing all right. Some good, some bad, but I'll kick things off with just how things are going. My round of story time. Um, so last week was night one of what I hope was the end of my 19-month-old's 6+ weeks sleep regression that has lasted since she had impetigo, which is a contagious rash. However, we don't know how she got it. My wife asked the other moms in the mom group chat by saying, "Hey, our daughter has this. Any ideas?" Nobody seemed to, speak up. But it was a spot in her on her back, but like a small little spot, but was definitely starting to spread. So we took her to the doctor. We put the prescription ointment on it. She only had to miss one day of school for the prescription to kick in, but because it was a covered area and she still wears onesies usually, it's only contagious to the touch. So she was able to go to school.
Awesome.
That said, with the onset of that illness, she started waking up in the middle of the night, and that lasted for about 6 weeks.
Oof.
As of yesterday, we are now 7 straight days of her sleeping through the night. And I know people are like, don't talk about a streak. Don't
Yeah, you
don't
don't want
jinx
to
it.
drink
But you
it.
know what? I've mentioned it every single day. I am out loud counting it. I am telling people. Now you millions of listeners get to hear it too. And I just want to say the streak is alive and we're going for night 8 of
I feel like
me
sleep is
not
like a
having to sleep
hard
on the
thing
floor.
to jinx. Like she's either figuring it out or she's not. But I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. It was a tough progression.
Yeah.
Because we had like a nice 6 months of her, like once she really got control of her arms and could reach her own pacifier and roll over and grab her water. Like we were in a spot where she was sleeping through. But then that whole impetigo ruined it is my amateur medical diagnosis of what happened here. And but I am happy to say we're going for night 8 of me not being woken up until the morning when my alarm goes off. So
way to go, little one. Way to
yeah.
go, little one. So last week, speaking of illnesses, and not to give us too much of a theme here, but as I mentioned last week, my daughter had strep. And so she had gotten strep on Wednesday or Thursday, I think maybe Thursday, the day we recorded. And she obviously couldn't go to school the next day. She couldn't go back until Monday. Again, similar to your case, prescription kicking in. And because of that, we decided I casually mentioned in the last episode that I was talking about, my son and potty training, and just something came up and I was like, I think we're almost through that. Well, we had gotten a message from his teacher that same day while he was at school. My daughter's home with strep. He's at school and she goes, by the way, he went on the potty. And we're like, he did what? Like, yeah, there's another little boy who's potty training in our class. And I was like, do you want to try? And he did. And we had been considering, if you've been following this podcast for a little while, we did a really poorly planned, 3-day method over Thanksgiving weekend. And we were slammed with events and going back and forth between various houses and things. And like travel is not great when you're trying to keep somebody, underwear free, pants free, roaming around to like learn things. And so we packed it up and we went back to diapers, and we're kind of getting that itch again of like, I think he's ready. I really think he's ready. And I'd kind of like to be done with this. And so using that and using the fact that my daughter couldn't go anywhere all weekend, we decided to pick my son up at school on Friday instead of sending him to my mom's, and just everybody stayed home all weekend. And we went through it. We did the potty training. He's now going to school in underwear. He's having, a couple of accidents, but today he was with my mother-in-law. He was going pee and poop on the potty. He hasn't had an accident at home every night all week.
Nice.
At least since Sunday, I don't think. He, and he'll just walk up. We got a little floor potty, and he just walks up, and then he's so proud to tell everybody, I pee in the potty. I did it. I went pee in the potty. All right. And then he'll help us, rinse it out and flush it. And he's pretty proud of himself. So
nice.
He's been consistent with the underwear and telling people, because there've been a couple times where I've brought him to the gym, especially, and like they'll have Paw Patrol on, to, just have the kids, it's like, listen, we know what this is. This is not high-end childcare that I've paid for. This is watch my kid while I work out. Like, I know what I'm getting. Yeah. I know what the bargain here is. If you're going to flip on the TV while you make whatever hourly wage you make, I'm not going to sit here and go, this is bad. But it kind of puts him in a trance. Long story short, he ends up kind of wetting himself because he's not paying attention, which is a pretty common use case during potty training, of just they can get really engrossed in something and then wet themselves because they're not paying any attention to their body whatsoever.
Right. Well, hey, I mean, that's a huge milestone. You guys are the go cloth diaper, but I do look forward to the day that my 19-month-old is also out of diapers, and that's one less expense.
I will say my son uses disposables at school, 3 days a week. And then my mother-in-law and my mom both started using disposables. So he was kind of only using cloth at this point on the weekends at home and not at night, because we also have been using a disposable for well over a year for nighttime, because they're just more absorbent. And so it's just like, very sparingly have we actually used the cloth this time around. I think just because of lifestyle and stuff, as much. But it's been a phase out. When he was before he went to school up until a year old, he was in cloth diapers almost exclusively.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of things that poop and pee, should we talk about pets?
We should talk about pets.
So, just to preface for everybody, my wife and I and our kids currently do not have pets, which makes me sad. Alex does have pets, but I always grew up with a full house of pets. My wife did not, so that's just where our side's coming from. You both grew up with pets, right? You and your wife?
Yeah. So I had a couple of dogs growing up consecutively, not at the same time. And then I had like goldfish and a hermit crab and, some other just sort of things that came and went in various seasons of my childhood. But yeah, I had a dog. The dog I grew up with, I got when I was 7, and she passed away when I think I was senior in college. So
yeah. We had growing up. There was always at least one dog, at least one cat. We've had 3 California desert tortoises roaming our backyard.
Sure.
At my mother's house since I was in elementary school. We had what is called a Sudanese plated lizard that we kept alive for about 20 years. Rescued, actually, technically. When my mom picked it up from the pet store, they thought it was they had it in the wrong climate, and it was dying. And so my mom was like, no. And then we kept it alive for another 20 years.
No.
Yeah.
Very Keanu Reeves assessment of the situation. No.
Yeah, just no. And I had a bird for a weekend. There was a rescue bird that I fostered as a trial because I thought it would be really cool to train it to talk and have my own personal buddy. But then it just squawked all night and kicked poop. And I was like, you know what? Birds aren't for me. So I wasn't a bird guy.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if I became a bird guy and I took my bird to college?
Oh,
you think we'd be in the same fraternity if I had a bird?
You wouldn't have been in any fraternity, Harry Potter. You can't just be taking owls to school and stuff. But
that'd be so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up mostly living with my mom, but at my dad's house, my dad and my stepmom had a dog. They have 2 now, but when I was growing up, my stepbrother and stepsister, they had some more interesting pets, right? I think there was a cat when I was in high school, but then my stepsister had cockatiel, whatever the small one is. Not a cockatoo, a cockatiel.
So right? She's a bird girl?
I guess. I think that was the only one they had. My dad hated it. Was very annoyed by it. I could see that. Would basically say things like, if that thing flew out the door, I would be like, oh no, please stop, don't go.
Yeah, very Willy Wonka-esque.
Yeah, at some point my stepbrother had a snake, pet snake, which I thought was kind of cool when I was, in middle school, and he would feed it rats or something. I'd be like, oh, it's going to hunt. This is Discovery Channel.
Yeah. So we would feed the lizard weekly. It actually ate dog food. There was dog food every day, just in a little dish. But on the weekends, it got a snossage, which, if you're unfamiliar in the pet world, is a frozen dead mouse. It's called a snossage. And
that's actually a dog treat brand as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But well, anyway, Petco, not a sponsor, sold snossages, which were frozen dead mice for reptiles.
Yep.
And one time, my dad weirdly was feeling generous and decided to get the lizard a live mouse, and it was like a big mouse. I'm talking like a 5-inch mouse, and um, the lizard befriended it, and like the mouse just kind of lived in the tank with the lizard for like 3 weeks before my mom was like, I need this mouse out of my house. So we like caught the mouse like in a red Solo cup. Shout out to another friend of ours. And uh and so like we caught the mouse and I had to like free the mouse. So that was because my mom wouldn't do it and I didn't want to like kill it. It was also like a big mouse. So I was like, I actually can't kill this unless I was getting into like some like pre-serial killer like neck snapping stuff. So I just I freed it. But
we are
that
jumping
was
off the rails here.
Yeah, sorry
Here. About disposing of mice, when really the conversation that I wanted to get to here is
gonna sip my beer.
Obviously our history, but for me, I don't think I mentioned this. Now currently we have a dog and we have a cat, and we got both of these animals since we've lived in Florida. We had a cat before this, but it was a cat that my wife had since high school. And then when we moved to New York City, the cat moved with us, and she was a wonderful cat. She was a sweet cat. And then shortly after we moved to Florida, she was diagnosed with cancer just riddling her body. And so we had to put her down. But then that was in October, I want to say, of 2017. And then in December, my wife is like, I just want to go without a pet for a little while. Mind you, we're living in a 1-1 apartment at the time. And I'm like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like, I don't want to have a pet in the scenario. And then Christmas time rolls around and the local Humane Society is like, oh, we need people to like foster our cats out for the holidays because we're not going to have enough volunteers to take care of them. And like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like we're waiving adoption fees and all that stuff and this, that, and the other. And so we get a cat. Literally like the day before my mom is scheduled to arrive to visit for Christmas. And I basically have to text my mom and be like, hey, is it okay if we adopt a cat over your visit? Because this was before she lived here. And she kind of was like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. Like, that sounds really like not okay. And she was never a cat person. We never grew up with cats. And so I think maybe, she knew our old cat, but she was like, I don't know that I want to do that. And then eventually she like texted me back the next day and was like, I don't feel right telling someone not to get a pet. That feels wrong. So like, you should get the cat. So
I understand what her initial hesitation probably was. Like, it's a new cat. You'd be training the cat would be like getting used to the house, and then like she'd be interrupting the acclimation. So
it turns out we ended up adopting like the sweetest cat in the world who's never bit or scratched a single person, including our kids. But that that leads me to my daughter. When we got this cat before my wife got pregnant, and my daughter, by the time she's a year and a half old, she's treating this poor cat, this cat who will not bite and will not scratch and is actually kind of bad at running away. She's treated like a tackling dummy. And I had to sit there and, tell her no. Well, about time she was 17, 18 months old and she was getting into tackling the cat, COVID hit. And when COVID hit, as I've mentioned before, she ends up going to my mother-in-law's house 9 to 5, 5 days a week so that my wife and I can work. And my mother-in-law, to keep her entertained, would take her outside in the front yard. They would post up chairs and they would wave and chat at a distance to people walking their dogs, because that was a way that they could be social at socially safe distance and converse with people. And the dogs, if they were on one of those like retractable leashes and they were friendly, they would let the leash out and the dog would come say hello. And my daughter would get very infatuated with all the neighborhood dogs and wanting a dog. And of course, my wife wanted a dog at this time. And I was like, I'm not sure that I want to get it. We got a cat And I feel like ever since we've had the kid, we're not grooming the cat as much or playing with the cat as much or all that stuff. We really want to introduce a dog. And then my wife introduced, I think, some psychological warfare where, like she
Mhm.
really got my daughter on board. And we
Mhm.
ended up
Mhm.
going to the shelter to meet some dogs. But I think one of the things, for anybody that's considering getting a dog, and I think Ethan will agree with me on this, but like we have adopted both of our pets. I'm a really big fan of doing that versus getting them from breeders. If you get your pets from breeders, whatever. I'm not here to, cast these morality aspersions or get into sort of that whole side of things. But I will say that adopting pets allows you, if you're adopting from reputable organizations, to like do your homework on the pet, right? When you're getting a puppy or kitten, you don't really know what the personality is going to be like. You don't know how they're going to interact with kids or cats or other dogs or whatever,
Mhm.
unique things you have in your situation. But when you're adopting a pet, like we adopted our dog when he was like 4 years old, it's like they were like, yeah, no, he's lived in a situation with cats and children before. He's fine with them.
Yeah.
He's good. And so we were able to sort of select, well, we go and we meet this dog, and we're walking him around and stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I think we can get the dog. And I asked my daughter, again, she's 18, 19 months old, maybe 20 months old at this point. And I'm like, hey, do you want Polo to come live with us? And she can't say a whole lot at this point, but she goes, please, please. And she does the sign language and says, please. Uh, and I was like, okay, fine, we'll get the dog. So that's how we ended up with the dog. But I think it was, I think I wouldn't have just like gotten a puppy,
Yeah.
at that stage, at that age. And then, he's been a fantastic dog. He's huge. He's half Saint Bernard, half German Shepherd. So he's like 90 pounds. And the only risk is he accidentally like hip checks the kids into the wall.
Mhm.
But but he's not intentionally harming anybody or hurting anyone. So he's doing great.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And again, much to my chagrin, we do not currently have a dog. I know at some point we're gonna have to get a cat. My 4.5-year-old daughter loves cats. The 19-month-old really loves dogs. She has said like, I'm getting a cat and little sister's getting a dog. And I was like, why don't we just get a family cat and a family dog? But I do acknowledge my wife's concern. Our current living situation is we don't have really like our own like outdoor space that's big enough for a dog, and we live in a townhouse that's got 3 stories, so it's not like we don't have space. It's just like not great space for pets.
Right.
Yeah, a cat would be fine.
Sure.
But I do have a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of experience with pets, and I could say, as someone whose parents are heavily involved in the world of pets, you guys did everything very much the right way. You started with a cat, you then had a kid, you then brought in a dog. Granted, the dog had experience, but where a lot of people tend to go wrong, I know, is sometimes if you have a dog first, when you bring in the kid or the
Hmm.
cat, they get really defensive and can be, not always, every dog's
Sure.
different, but they can be defensive, they can get jealous, they can lash out. But when the dog comes into the situation, they're
Yeah.
used to knowing that they're not always going to get the full
Yeah.
breadth of attention. So kudos to you guys for doing
Well,
it
thank
in
you.
the professionally recommended order.
Yeah, I think that it's been good for us, and I think I agree with your wife's assessment about the outdoor space. We have a fenced in backyard. It's big enough for our
Mhm.
dog to like get up to close to a full run, if not a full run, and stretch his legs. He doesn't need a ton of activity. He'll usually run around for about 30 seconds and then lay down. But the ability to do it is nice, and especially to, go to the bathroom. He does enjoy walks. We have to work with him a lot on the leash training, especially at his size. So it's not as much of a concern with like a smaller dog when like you can, like if my dog wants to get going, my wife has to use every ounce of her strength to like pull in the other direction kind of thing.
Right.
If he saw another dog and wanted to pick a fight. But having that fenced in backyard gives us that option of like, he can relieve himself. We can let him out for 5 minutes. He can do his thing and he can be good. And there have been times where like hurricanes have come through and like knocked down some of our fence. Right. And so letting him out in the backyard isn't an option. We have to walk him. It definitely makes your life a lot harder when you're trying to like get your 2 kids out the door, get yourself ready for the day. Like even with both of us working at home, and obviously we have some other concerns about time of day, like today it was 85 degrees and like, I don't really like walking him when it's too hot. So you have to do it, early in the morning or later in the evening or all that kind of stuff, which is when everybody else does it. And then when you've got a dog that, wants to fight with other dogs on the leash, then, it becomes a pretty unpleasant experience.
So question about your dog, to tie it back to a recurring theme. How is your dog as an eater? Does it have meal times or does it practice intuitive eating and eats throughout the day when he's hungry?
No, he is not an intuitive eater.
Okay.
Maybe it's something we could get him to do. I don't know, but we feed him twice a day. We feed him twice a day to moderate his food because he would just eat and eat. But one thing we have tried to do that I think is really nice is like when we feed him, we make him sit, stay, and then we release him to his food dish when it's time. And both of my kids can successfully get him to do that whole process.
Nice.
And we have intentionally like taught them how to do it and gotten him to follow their commands so that he, understands sort of the pecking order of like, no, they're in charge. You listen to them.
Right.
And they will sit there and do the same thing. When we're letting him through doors, we always make him sit and hold until we release him in. And both the kids can usually do that. Sometimes when he's really antsy to get inside, he'll blow past them. But that hierarchy.
That's good. I would say growing up, we always got lucky. Every dog, 4 dogs over the course of like my childhood, was really good at essentially intuitive eating. We would regularly just take a look at the dog food dish and water, and we'd fill it as needed. But for the most part, they'd eat when they're hungry, they'd walk away, they'd drink when they're thirsty, they'd walk away, and everything. We never really had a pet that overate, which was unless it was treat time, and like that was just like
I find it interesting with my dog about the overeating. Just the quick aside, it's like we give him about 2 cups of dry kibble, which is what is recommended for his weight, and then we give him like a spoonful of wet food to like mix it in, almost like sort of like a sauce or gravy on top. If we don't include that wet food, I think he actually does practice a little bit more intuitive eating. And again, it's like a normal, just human spoonful of wet food out of the can, plop it in there, and mix it in. If we don't include that, he does tend to like stop a lot earlier, but then he just never comes back to it. He'll just wait until you refresh it at the next meal time. If you don't do that, he'll just let it get old, and then the cat will come up and eat it, and we don't need that.
Right. Kudos again to you guys for the going the rescue route.
The whole idea of doing this episode for me was never to just like be like, I am doing so many things right.
That was not. I didn't actually intend that either. But you're the one with the pet currently. I explained why we don't have one. I do have a unique knowledge base of pets, given my upbringing, and I do just want to say, like, I will judge people for going to breeders. That is something I will say that I do. I am very much you got to go with the rescues. You got to a lot of breeders, and I don't want to besmirch all of them, but not all pets that come out of breeders are what you're paying for. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, and I think you also have some issues with, especially a lot of the breeds that are very,
In vogue.
yeah, I would say the fashionable breeds or the highly engineered breeds, you run into a lot of health problems a lot of times with a lot of those dogs. And that's not to say that other dogs aren't going to have health problems, but when you mix up the breeds into some mutts, then quite often you get, healthier dogs because they're having, fewer of the weaknesses of, say, a pure breed. But
Yeah.
I would say the things that we considered
Mm-hmm.
that I would tell other people to consider, right? So consider the other pets you have, right? If you already have a dog, consider how that dog is doing. I have heard from a lot of people, and you would probably know better than me, but like, I think there are some people that maybe they have a dog that like they can't handle very well, and they just kind of like assume the solution is like just get another dog so they have someone to play with, and then they have two wild
Yeah.
dogs.
Yeah, that's a very common,
Okay.
usually incorrect assumption. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say, like we considered our kid at the time, because we only had one kid when we got a dog. We obviously had no kids when we got a cat, and it was a decision, we wanted to make. And we were also simultaneously making the decision that we wanted to try and have a kid. But I felt bad for my cat when we adopted her, because this is another concern, is allergies, right? And this is something to
mhm.
like brace yourself for, right? Our cat
Yeah.
was up for adoption because she was in a very, very loved household. We got an entire manual on all the things she loved and cared
But they
about.
were, allergic,
The
or they had a
the
kid.
the the daughter and the granddaughter moved in, and the granddaughter was allergic.
Mm.
And so they couldn't keep the cat. And so I was very, very afraid that, like, inside of 2 months of getting this cat, my wife tells me she's pregnant. I'm like, I really hope for everybody's sake here involved that like we don't, like, our kid isn't
Yeah.
allergic to the cat, right, or the dog. It would, in the case with our son, because the dog came before our son came along. But
Yeah.
that's like a nightmare of like having to give away a pet because of something like that. So it's obviously something to consider. And I know that it's a bit of a sore spot. We've had friends, right, where they're a couple, and sometimes they can have a dog, but one of the people is allergic to cats, or vice versa, right? And certain
Mhm.
types of pet dander. And so I think that's something to consider. Like, I don't think making someone miserable or making them take allergy medication 24/7 is
Right.
necessarily worth having a pet in the house, or at
Mhm.
least that type of pet. Get a fish tank. I don't know anybody's
Yeah.
allergic to a fish tank.
Yeah. Definitely not. So funny aside. An ex of mine had a couple big allergies. One was shellfish. Another one was cats, and I knew about cats. She talked about it a lot. So when I brought her home to Los Angeles, I told my parents, hey, like, I need you to start closing my door. I need you to vacuum my room and close my door because she's allergic to cats.
Sure.
And like she's like, I was like, she'll deal with it in the house, but just like where we're gonna sleep, like, you need to do a good job. And they said, yeah, no problem, we got this. We get there, and she sees my dog at the time, who um, Achilles is no longer with us, but she sees Achilles, very loving dog.
Good cat.
Uh, Looks at me and is like, "Hey, Ethan, big bro, this is clearly a girl that's important to you. I'm gonna show her some love." And I was like, "I got you, Achilles." And he just goes up, licks her face for about 5 minutes, shows her all the love in the world. She was like, "Did I tell you I was allergic to dogs?" And I was like, no. And I was
You
like,
didn't want to mention that 4 minutes and 50 seconds ago.
yeah, I was like, you are very aware of the pets at my parents' house, and you told me to make sure the cat didn't get in. How could you forget to tell me about the dog?
Uh, I
And
know. I
yeah,
don't want to answer
yeah,
that question
yeah,
live
yes.
on the
Like
podcast.
we now know, right? But that was just like a really funny aside of how that totally changed my plans that night. But the trip overall and just navigating the household. So
Yeah. But I think, the next phase of this is going to be, our dog is now, um, I guess he was 5 when we got him. He's now 9.
mhm.
And so and he's big, and that means he's only got but so many years left, right?
Yeah.
Our cat is probably 11, 12. I
Okay.
don't know exactly how many years she's got left, right? And so
Cat
it's going to be
cats cats are closer to like 17 to 20.
it depends though, because
Right.
obviously, like, our last cat got cancer.
Right. I'm
And
talking about just like your generic healthy cat. You're
sure,
looking at
sure,
17 to 20. Yeah.
sure. But looking at all those things and, prepping, we were talking about death, right? And
Mhm.
I think that was the season premiere, but the idea of having to have those conversations with the kids, right?
Yeah.
I remember when my childhood dog, like my dog that I grew up with when I was like a toddler, right? Before the dog that I spent most of my childhood with. When my parents got divorced, they told me that they had sent Vito to a farm. The old classic thing. And then it took me 15 or 16 years later, and I'm
Mhm.
like learning that, and I'm like, "Wait, were you trying to just pull the wool over my eyes and use a euphemism?" Like, I actually thought that for a good portion of my life that this dog went to a farm. And my dad, I tell my dad this, and he goes, "No, it wasn't a euphemism. Like, we couldn't keep him because we didn't know where we were going to live. And like, we actually had him live out his final years on a nearby farm to where we were moving away from. Cause like my parents were getting divorced, and like my dad was going to get an apartment, and my mom and I were like moving in with my grandma. And so it was just like nobody could keep the dog. And they actually just took an old dog and let him live out his final years on a farm. And I was like, oh,
Oh,
okay, that's actually
wow.
nice.
You're like
Or
you're the
he's
only
doubling
person that was
down and is just like,
yeah.
I'm not gonna reveal the secret.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, no, that's
So having to have
so
that conversation, I think I will try to, be blunt and honest with my children, in an empathetic manner, but just
yeah.
it's going to be tough,
I
and it's going to be tough for all of us. I know it was a lot when our cat died, especially on my wife. And I
yeah.
think, with both of these pets, they will have definitely imprinted, especially on my daughter. She absolutely adores them.
Yeah. So when I was so Scaramouche the cat, um my mom got in law school. I must have been like 3 or 4 when he went under the house. That was our version of went to the farm. Um, just dug a hole under the house. It's like okay, and yeah, and sure,
Okay,
and
Scaramouche.
yeah, and so I don't
Did he
really
do the
remember that.
fandango?
He did, and Ben the dog, not to be convinced with my preschool classmate Ben the boy. Ben the dog
I wasn't
was
gonna make that mistake, but thank you.
yes, yeah, was when I was 11. Um, Mocha was a Pomeranian who, unfortunately, at like her normal morning, like poop in our front lawn, um, was swiped up by a coyote right in front of my mom, which was
Oh boy.
very odd news to wake up to.
Yeah.
Um, and then, uh, and then Achilles, who I mentioned in the story about the ex, uh, we got him at like 12 weeks old. He was born in the shelter because his mom was a pregnant rescue. So he was born in the shelter. So we were his first owners, and he made it to about 15. And um, it was the day of my daughter's first birthday that my parents had to put him down. It was a very emotional day for me because we had just celebrated our daughter turning 1. We had been parents for a
Sure.
year, which is really the celebration. It's 4 more so than anything.
Yeah.
And we did the whole, it was right in the heart of COVID. You were there for the virtual birthday party where we got like 50 people on Zoom accurately singing happy birthday, like so pretty much in unison, which was pretty good.
Yeah.
And then just a couple hours later, my mom called me crying to be like, I didn't want to tell you during the birthday party, but like, if you want to say goodbye to Achilles, like now's the time. And yeah, that was a tough day. And then I'm not going to list the rest. I'm not going to list the rest of the deaths. I realize.
Yeah,
going on.
we could get into an in memoriam segment
here,
but
didn't mean to do that. But
the other thing I did, something you said that actually sparked something, and it wasn't intentional, but talking about traveling to your parents' house and then talking about pets reminded me for people to consider that, like, if you are people that like to travel and go places like we are, pets are sometimes an impediment. We did a doggy daycare for our dog for a while, and we would do that when we were having people over, just so he wouldn't have to be outside, but he wouldn't be all up in everybody's business because, again, he's big, so he can just kind of be in the way, and he wants to be a lap dog. But we started taking him to doggy daycare, and eventually they told us that we would have to pay extra, and he'd have to have a private suite because he wasn't getting along with the other dogs well enough. Well, it's like, oh, that's such a bummer. Like, I don't want to pay essentially twice as much, and he's not going to be able to socialize. He's just going to be like alone in an air-conditioned room. And I was like, I'm sitting alone right now in an air-conditioned room that's on a property that's free, and we could put a water bowl in here, and he could hang out in here if we wanted to entertain people. And so we ended up having to do that. But when we actually travel, we have to get a pet sitter now, because we used to take him there and do overnights, but then we're like, it was going to cost us, like $75 a night to board him. And we're like, we're already getting a pet sitter to come and clean the litter box for the cat. Yeah. So, we just have to hire them. We have to hire them a little bit more, because she has to come and feed the dog twice a day and let him out twice a day, versus the cat only gets fed once and litter box. So you could do it in like one 10-minute, 15-minute brush or cuddle with her kind of session.
Right.
So that is a consideration, right? That, those kind of costs can mount up. Our dog dug a hole in the yard the other day, sprained his shoulder. We had to get him like an MRI or something, and like a couple of vet visits because he was limping. We've had all sorts of various things, like we had to, when we got our dog, he had heartworm, right? The shelter knew about it, and they were treating him for it. And they were basically like, you can adopt this dog, but you got to bring him back for the treatment. It's on us, kind of thing. But there's just a lot of that kind of stuff that, like, we have to, the getting them their shots and all their different things, it adds up. So don't just think about it, especially if you're reliving in childhood nostalgia, right? And I'm not trying to call you out, but if you're like, man, I loved having a dog around the house, I love having a cat around the house, there's a lot of crap that, like, if you forgot to clean the litter box, if you forgot to walk the dog, your mom and dad were back there behind you, like covering your butt, and you didn't know it, or maybe you didn't appreciate it. And now you're going to have to be the last line of defense to keep yet another thing alive, when you've already, if you're listening to this podcast, have at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, human beings,
as many as you want,
that are relying on you for that. So remember,
dependence,
understand that, like, a dog is going to need that. A dog's going to need that for a decade plus, and a dog's never really going to be smarter than like a 1.5-year-old. So, just think about that. Do you want a toddler? Do you want another toddler that has to use the bathroom outside in your house for 10 years? Right. And will give you unconditional love and companionship.
It's true. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way to end it. I'm not going to ruin it with any more in memoriams.
There we go.
Yeah. Let's do working on the dad bod.
Sure.
Yeah. So I did not have a good week in terms of intuitive eating. However,
Mm.
I am so last week I was 194.6. Today I'm 192.6. Not sure exactly where that was, but I've been in quite a bit of um, fluctuation mode lately, and I had two in the last 4 days, two like old people related injuries. As you know, on Sunday, I was bedridden for most of the day because I got this searing pain in my left shoulder blade. I don't know where it came from. It was isolated to
Right.
there. And then actually for like the duration of the day was switching between like the lower part of my neck and my shoulder blade, just going back and forth. So I couldn't really do much. Um, Last night my like right knee really started hurting, and
Oh,
like I
turning into
was
an
just
old
kind of like,
man.
yeah, and I like was just swinging my leg like right kind of what I'm doing right now, just sitting on the chair, just like, popping my leg forward as if I'm, getting hit on the patella for like
Oof.
the what the doctor
Reflex test.
the reflex test. So I'm doing that, and I can like even through my AirPods hear the crick 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 crick, crick, and I'm like, that feels good, but that's gonna hurt. So what I did do today, and you already know this, but for the millions of listeners, I did my normal 5K today, but I walked it instead. Didn't change anything about my route. So I got in the 3.2 mile walk as my lunch break today. So it took a little longer than normal, but unlike a normal lunchtime jog, I took my work phone with me to make sure I was still working during the walk. So I'm trying my best to not let injuries totally derail me. But the other day with my shoulder, like it was so bad, I just had to pop some Aleve in the morning before even like eating anything, which I know you're not supposed to do. And or yeah, and like ended up sleeping until like 1.
Oof.
Just yeah, so not great.
Man, the dad bods are failing us. Working on the dad bods, they're failing us. Well, for me, as I mentioned last week, I had the old man thing where I got told I would be a good candidate for hearing aids. I am still
Right.
on the medicine treating that, so I haven't been
Okay.
weighing myself, just because I know the numbers are going to be a little off. I've been doing it sporadically, but not as consistently. And then yesterday, my scale died, and I need to get new batteries. But today was the last dose of the medicine, so I'm
Good.
hoping that by next week I will be back at some sort of equilibrium, can refocus myself, see where I'm at. It's sort of one of those things where I'm like, I don't even know once I lose some water weight what I'll be at, or how much of the water weight is actually still even left, right? And get back to that. But I think, make a really concerted effort to, wherever I am north of 180 pounds, making a fairly reasonable guess that I will be north of 180 pounds come next week, just like setting that roadmap of like a pound a week, knock it
Mhm.
off and get it done. Because, like I was saying before, I had all this happen right before my birthday. I was just kind of tired of having the updates of like it always feeling like, oh, it was a good week, it was a bad week, I'm up and I'm down. I'm like, it has been
Yeah.
many, many months and it hasn't been that many pounds. And I'm like, there becomes a point where it's just like, I want to stop like sporadically eating in a deficit, consistently get to a deficit, and then get to maintenance mode and see what that
Mhm.
feels like. I really want to try, like, because that has always been sort of the tough part for me, is
Yeah.
getting past the weight loss and into the maintenance mode. And I think because I've tried to go so easy and intuitive and slow paced with the weight loss, I don't think unless you have a lot of weight to lose, and a lot can mean
Right.
50, 60, 70 pounds or more. I think 2 pounds a week is probably pretty aggressive, but I think 1 pound a week is usually safe as long as like you feel okay. Right. And so because it's only 500 calories a day of a deficit.
Mhm.
And so I'm just like, yeah, just like refocusing myself, getting after it, getting where, I want to be sooner rather than later, because part of the other thing that I want to do is finish this off, and it's going to dictate how I'm working out, right? Because once I get to a maintenance mode, I actually want to switch into, like, right now I've been on a hypertrophy kick of, just trying to do, 10 to 20 reps of stuff, but I want to get into like strength stuff and, building more strength and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't burn as many calories, right? Because you're moving a lot slower and you're focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 rep sets. And I'm like, I would much prefer not to be in a calorie deficit while trying to do that, but I don't want to try and like shift the goal all the time.
So, while we're on this segment, I don't know if all you millions watching have noticed that I've been sitting like this a lot, and I just think I look really good right now in this position, as opposed to this position. I'm just kind of like right now, the way like my shirt's folding, like my sleeve length. This is what it should look like, and by it I mean me. I want to objectify myself right here. This is where it's at. This is what I want.
This episode has gone so off the rails in so many weird places. We need to get out of here before this gets too weird and we get canceled.
That's fair. Well, on that note, thank you for working on the Dad Pod with us. We really appreciate you being here. Please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. Check the bell for notifications so that you know when new episodes drop. Please, we asked you last week to recommend to one person this show. I've challenged you to recommend it to 2 people, because we're always trying to get better. And
share them the website, workingondadadpod.com.
Yeah, it's a really good website. Alex made it. It's dope.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks, guys.
Dope. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for working on the Dad Pod with us. Any resources that we mentioned during the show will be in the show notes. If you have questions, thoughts, or just want to talk with us, the best place is in the comments on YouTube. We're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Threads at Working on the Dad Pod, and on Twitter at Working on Dad Pod. Following and subscribing is always appreciated. Please rate and review us. That helps get the show to new people. And if you know a dad who would enjoy our show, sharing it with them is a huge help to them and us. Have a great week.